Last week was the long-awaited Exilecon 2023. While many of us were eager to hear all of the new details on Path of Exile 2 and the new Challenge League, GGG started the show off with a shocking announcement. Path of Exile 2 would no longer be an expansion to Path of Exile 1 and would now be a standalone game. Both games will receive updates and staggered challenge leagues, so players can play one or both games going forwards. This is a huge change, and the community has had very mixed reactions to it. In this video, I want to talk a bit about why I think this is happening, what this means for PoE going forwards, some concerns, and how I feel about it. GGG didn't spend a lot of time explaining the reasons behind the change. Only that it became clear to them that PoE 2 needed to be a separate game as they continued development. However, to me, the reasons seem very, very clear. Ever since the original announcement of PoE 2, there's been unease and discontent in the PoE community. There was a feeling, partially due to developer statements, that PoE 2 was going to have to slow the game down somewhat when it launched. That the insane screen clearing speed of modern Path of Exile was just too much to be the baseline of this new game, and that GGG would have to slow things down. There was also the feeling that GGG would need to slow things down gradually in PoE 1 as we got closer and closer to the launch of PoE 2 in order to ease players into it. Players who have been playing PoE 1 for the last few years, or God forbid visited the subreddit, will know the extreme outrage that happened when GGG did, in fact, try to slow the game down. Patches 3.15 and 3.19 were received extremely negatively by the community, to the point GGG had to effectively roll back many of the changes they had made, publicly go in front of the community to explain where things had gone wrong, and even permanently withdraw from engaging with the community on the subreddit in order to protect themselves from the extreme, disproportionate toxicity. It's clear that part of why Path of Exile is so beloved is because of the extreme, absurd map clearing speed you can achieve, and that large portions of the community will absolutely hate any attempts to curtail that. But that isn't the sort of game the devs want to make. And if we're being honest, perhaps isn't the sort of game the general gaming public wants to play either. After all, one of the major goals of PoE 2 is to bring in new players who previously didn't enjoy PoE. When looked at through that lens, the original plan to make PoE 2 into an expansion for PoE is really the root cause of these problems. If GGG went with their original plan of having PoE 2 effectively replace PoE 1, they would run the risk of alienating their entire current player base of PoE 1 players. But if they instead compromised on their vision for PoE 2, they'd run the risk of having the game not be different enough to bring in new players and stifle their ability to create an experience that was wildly different from PoE 1. Having them be two separate games solves these problems. They can keep the fast gameplay of PoE 1 while also providing a slower, different, and more combat-focused experience in PoE 2. So what does this mean going forwards? Well, it means we're going to have two different flavors of Path of Exile. We'll be getting twice as many challenge leagues per year, as both PoE 1 and PoE 2 will be receiving their own different challenge leagues, and players will be able to play whichever one seems more appealing to them. Or, both. This also means that they can have PoE 2 diverge in some pretty wild ways from PoE 1. They've already previewed that many currency items have been overhauled and some have been removed, presumably with the goal of making currency more useful for actually crafting your own items. Not to mention all the crazy new weapon swap features, which will completely change how players create builds. However, there are a number of major concerns that remain mostly unaddressed. The biggest one is what the impact of split development resources will have on PoE 1. Will it continue to get major development support? Will the challenge leagues end up being small and lackluster? Will PoE 1 development end suddenly after a few years? I think that as far as challenge leagues go, I'm not really concerned. There was a comment during Exilecon stating that for the last few years, the development team of PoE 1 has mostly been just 8 people. If that's true, it shows that they can still create some incredible leagues on a shoestring budget, and I'd expect support for PoE 1 to continue indefinitely, as long as there remains even a small, dedicated community. The bigger concern, I think, is the issues in PoE 1 that we've been hearing PoE 2 would fix for years now. Melee builds, large swaths of useless, underpowered skills, balance issues with ascendancies and archetypes. Will they just end up remaining bad forever now? Will we ever see major balance changes again? Or will PoE 1 just keep chugging along with players feeling more and more pigeonholed into specific archetypes and skills? I think this is something GGG needs to address directly. It's not just enough to know that they intend to continue updating and creating challenge leagues for PoE 1. We need to hear that they're committed to having it be its own game with its own distinct playstyle, and not just a glorified PoE 1 Classic server. However, my biggest concern is the economic impacts of splitting the player base across 2 games. PoE relies on having players to trade with, and the trade system requires players to be currently online in order to trade. If you've ever tried to play a regular challenge league after something like a flashback league has started, you know it can be nearly impossible to do any trades. Everyone has switched over to playing the new flashback league, and the league feels basically over, whether or not you personally want to keep playing. Chris pitched the idea that PoE 1 leagues may launch something like 4 weeks before a new PoE 2 league, giving them about the lifespan of a flashback event. If you want to be a dedicated PoE 1 player, you may find that you can only realistically play the game within these short 4-week windows. Similarly, playing PoE 2 late in the league, after the PoE 1 league has already launched, may have similar issues. I think if GGG is going to go down this path, they need to seriously consider changing their stance on offline trading in PoE. There needs to be some way of still getting the items you need, even when the majority of players have switched to playing the other game. Otherwise, both games will end up suffering. I know GGG is dead set against anything with instant buyout, but if they implemented something that let you buy offline items and then you receive them some amount of time later, even days later perhaps, it would really fix this issue and allow players to buy previously listed items even after that player has moved on to the other game's challenge league. And maybe even give these players a reason to switch back once they're bored of the new league to a pile of currency they can use to dive back in. Having said all of that, despite these concerns, I would say that I am feeling very, very positive about this decision. I think that had they continued down the path of having PoE 2 be an expansion, it would have been disastrous. Either the game would have been too slow or not different enough. Now, not only do we get to keep playing the game we know and love, but we get to play 2 different takes on Path of Exile. I've said before on this channel that I find the idea of Ruthless extremely exciting. I've been playing PoE since closed beta, and I will play and enjoy other ARPGs that are a fair bit slower than PoE. As much as I love the insane clear speed you can reach in PoE, I also feel like I'd enjoy a much slower experience with a bigger emphasis on combat and moment-to-moment gameplay. And I feel like that PoE 2 is going to be exactly that. And I get to have both. And I get to have twice as many challenge leagues per year. To me, this just means more Path of Exile, and I absolutely love it. I hope GGG can nail this and have two different versions of PoE that appeal to both of these playstyles. I'm really excited to see what they have cooking for PoE 2 and explore a game that's going to be both new and familiar. That's all for this video though. What do you guys think of this change? Are you excited to have two different versions of PoE? Nervous that this means PoE 2 might not be what you want? Happy that you can keep playing your clear speed character forever? It looks like we've got quite a bit of PoE content on our way. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.